Don't come to my wedding. You are no longer my family. My daughter wrote to me in a message 3 days before she was set to walk down the aisle. I replied with one word, understood. Then I dialed exactly one phone number. 24 hours later, I had 83 missed calls, a front porch full of screaming relatives, and a daughter who was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. My name is Harrison Caldwell, and at 76 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal the world had to offer. I spent 40 years building Caldwell Logistics, from a single delivery truck into a national empire. I have stared down union strikes, hostile takeovers, and economic recessions without blinking. But nothing prepares a man for the moment his own flesh and blood decides he is nothing more than a walking checkbook. Before I tell you what I did that night, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. It brings a little warmth to this old man's heart to know I am not telling this story to an empty room. It was 11:30 at night in my study in Chicago. The city lights were glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, lonely shadows across the mahogany desk that had been my command center for 3 decades. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been this way for 5 years, ever since my wife, Catherine, passed away. I missed the sound of her humming in the hallway, the way she would come in and tell me to put the pen down and come to bed. Tonight, however, I was glad she wasn't here to see what I was doing. In front of me lay a checkbook and a fountain pen. I had just finished writing a check for $350,000. The ink was still wet. It was the final payment for the venue, the Ritz-Carlton, for the wedding of my only daughter, Tiffany. At 29, Tiffany was beautiful, vibrant, and completely blind to reality. She was marrying Brad Sterling, a 32-year-old man who called himself an investment consultant, but seemed to invest mostly in his own wardrobe and expensive cars. I looked at the check. $350,000. That was more money than my father made in his entire life. It was just for the reception. That did not include the flowers, the dress, the honeymoon, or the house in Lake Forest I had foolishly promised to gift them. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I told myself I was doing this for Catherine. She would have wanted Tiffany to have her fairy tale. She would have told me that money is just paper, but family is forever. I was about to close the checkbook when my phone vibrated against the wood of the desk. The screen lit up in the semi-darkness. It was a message from Tiffany. I put on my reading glasses, expecting a last-minute thank you, or perhaps a question about the rehearsal dinner schedule. Instead, I read the words that would incinerate my relationship with my daughter. The message read, "Harrison, Brad, and I have been talking. We think it is best if you do not come to the wedding on Saturday. Brad says your presence with your wheelchair and your old stories doesn't fit the image we are trying to project to his investors. We need this day to be perfect and modern. We know you already sent the checks, so just stay home and rest. To be honest, you are not really family to us anymore. You are just the financier. We will send you photos." I read it once. Then I took off my glasses, wiped them with my handkerchief, put them back on, and read it again. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a typo. Harrison. She didn't even call me Dad. She called me Harrison. My heart didn't break. I think hearts only break when there is hope, and in that second hope evaporated from the room. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a familiar coldness I used to feel in the boardroom when a competitor tried to slit my throat. This wasn't the petulant outburst of a child. This was a calculated strike. They wanted the money, but they were ashamed of the source. They wanted the Ritz-Carlton, but they didn't want the 76-year-old man who paid for it, because my gray hair and my cane didn't match their Instagram aesthetic. I looked at the photo of Catherine on my desk. Her eyes seemed to look back at me with sadness. I whispered to her, "I am sorry, my love. I tried. I really tried." But you didn't raise her to be like this, and I certainly didn't work 18-hour days for 40 years to be told I am just a financier. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could have called her. I could have screamed. I could have begged. I could have reminded her that I wiped her tears when she fell off her bike, that I paid for her private schools, her European vacations, her lifestyle. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Tiffany was under Brad's spell, and Brad was a predator who smelled blood in the water. He thought I was old. He thought I was weak. He thought I would just roll over and take it because I was afraid of losing her. He was wrong. I typed a single word in reply. Understood. I hit send. Then I picked up the check for $350,000. I held it in both hands. The paper felt heavy, like it carried the weight of my foolish, unconditional love. I tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping was the loudest thing in the house. Then I tore it again and again until it was just a pile of blue confetti on my mahogany desk. I reached for the bottle of bourbon I kept on the shelf, poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass, and took a sip. The burn felt good. It woke me up. Then I dialed a number. It was 11:45 at night. I knew Monica, the wedding planner, would still be awake. In this industry, 3 days before a $1 million event, no one sleeps. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless and professional. "Mr. Caldwell, is everything all right?" "It is late." "Monica." I said, my voice steady and calm, the voice that used to terrify junior executives. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. The wedding contract. It is in my name, correct?" "Yes, sir, of course." "You are the sole signatory. Is there a problem with the seating chart? I can move your table closer to the front if you like." "No, Monica. I don't need a table. I need you to cancel it." There was a silence on the other end of the line so profound, I thought the call had dropped. Then a nervous laugh. "I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell. The connection must be bad." "Did you say cancel?" I took another sip of bourbon. I said cancel, Monica. Everything. The flowers, the venue, the catering, the lighting, the photography. Cancel the jazz band. Cancel the limo service. Cancel the order for the vintage wine Brad insisted on last week. Mr. Caldwell. Monica stammered, panic rising in her voice. "The wedding is in 72 hours. The food is being prepped. The flowers are on a plane from Holland right now. The cancellation fees will be 100%. You won't get a dime back. It will cost you nearly $500,000 for nothing." "I know the terms of the contract, Monica," I interrupted. I wrote the check for the deposit and I read the fine print. "I am willing to pay the full cancellation fee. I want you to send out a notification to all vendors immediately. Cease all operations. If a single flower petal enters the Ritz-Carlton ballroom on Saturday under the name Caldwell, I will sue the vendor for breach of contract." But Sir Monica was practically crying now. "What about Tiffany? What about Brad? Does the bride know?" "The bride," I said, looking at the screen of my phone where her cruel message still glowed, "has informed me that I am merely a financier, not family. And as a financier, I have decided to withdraw my investment from this venture. It is a business decision, Monica. Send the cancellation invoice to my lawyer in the morning. Good night." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, the fog of parental obligation had lifted. But I wasn't done yet. The wedding was just the tip of the iceberg. I opened my banking app on my tablet. I navigated to the credit card section. I saw the list of authorized users. Tiffany Caldwell. Brad Sterling. I looked at the recent transactions. Just today, there was a charge for $5,000 at a luxury spa. Yesterday, $8,000 at a designer boutique. Last week, a $12,000 deposit for a private jet charter to Bora Bora for their honeymoon. I clicked on Tiffany's card. Status active. I tapped the button that said freeze card. A small pop-up asked me to confirm. I tapped yes. The status changed to frozen. Then I clicked on Brad's card. The card I had foolishly given him for wedding-related expenses, which he had been using for dinners, clubs, and gambling. I didn't just freeze it. I reported it as lost or stolen, ensuring it would be immediately declined and flagged if he tried to swipe it again. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there in their penthouse apartment that I paid the rent for, Tiffany and Brad were probably laughing. They were probably toasting with champagne I bought, mocking the old man they thought they had discarded. They thought they had won. They thought they could keep the lifestyle while cutting out the source. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet had just disappeared. They had no idea that when the sun rose tomorrow, their credit cards would be useless pieces of plastic. Their dream venue would be locking its doors to them, and the 76-year-old man they called a clueless sponsor was about to teach them exactly how the real world works. I finished my bourbon, turned off the desk lamp, and walked out of the study. For the first time in a long time, I slept soundly. I needed the rest. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. The morning sun hit the limestone facade of my Chicago estate at exactly 7:30, just as it had for the last 30 years. I sat at the small bistro table in the breakfast nook, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of me. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was a peace I knew was about to be shattered, a calm before a hurricane I had engineered myself. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, relishing the quiet. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy cloak of obligation had been lifted, replaced by the armor of resolve. Next to my coffee cup, my phone sat face up on the marble table. It was vibrating incessantly, dancing across the smooth surface like a nervous beetle. The screen was a blur of notifications. 83 missed calls, 120 text messages. The names flashing across the screen were the same two over and over again. Tiffany, Brad. Tiffany, Brad. Occasionally, a flying monkey from my extended family would chime in, a cousin or an aunt, asking if the rumors were true, if I had really lost my mind. I didn't touch the phone. I just watched it. I saw messages that ranged from confusion to begging and finally to unbridled rage. One text from Tiffany read, "Dad, pick up the phone. Monica says the check bounced. This isn't funny." Another from Brad read, "Old man, you are making a mistake you cannot fix. Call me now." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who knows he holds the only key to the door everyone is trying to beat down. I opened my tablet and checked my bank account. The freeze on the credit cards was active. The authorization for the wedding payments had been revoked. The transfer for their monthly rent, usually scheduled for this morning, had been canceled. The digital siege was intense, but the physical one was about to begin. At exactly 8:15, the intercom buzzer at the front gate began to scream. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a long, continuous drone, the sound of someone leaning their entire body weight against the button. I heard Mrs. O'Malley, my housekeeper of 3 decades, drop a spoon in the kitchen. She came rushing into the breakfast nook, wiping her hands on her apron, her face pale. "Mr. Caldwell," she stammered, "there is someone at the gate. They are not stopping." "Shall I call the police?" "No, Martha," I said, standing up and buttoning my cardigan. "It is just family. Let them in. But stay in the kitchen. I do not want you to hear what is about to be said." She nodded and pressed the release button. Through the window, I watched as Brad's flashy red sports car, a car I knew he couldn't afford, without my help, screeched up the long driveway. He parked haphazardly on the lawn, not even bothering with the pavement, tearing up the grass. I paid a landscaping crew thousands to maintain. They burst out of the car before the engine had even died. Tiffany was wearing sweatpants and oversized sunglasses, her hair a mess. Brad was in a tight t-shirt that looked like it cost more than my suit. They stormed up the front steps, and before they could pound on the heavy oak door, I opened it. I stood there, blocking the entrance, holding my coffee cup. "Good morning," I said. Tiffany pushed past me, nearly knocking the coffee out of my hand. She marched into the foyer and spun around, her face twisted in a mask of fury I barely recognized. The sweet little girl who used to ask for bedtime stories was gone. In her place was a woman consumed by entitlement. "Are you insane?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Monica called me at 6 in the morning. She said you canceled everything. She said the vendors are packing up. She said the wedding is off. Do you have dementia? Have you completely lost your mind?" Brad followed her in, slamming the front door behind him. He stood next to her, crossing his arms, trying to look intimidating. He failed. To me, he looked like a petulant child who had been told he couldn't have dessert. "Harrison, look at me," Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are acting irrational. We know you are grieving Mom still, and we know you get confused, but you cannot just destroy a $500,000 event because of a mood swing." "A mood swing," I repeated, my voice low. Tiffany stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration. "Dad, how could you? I sent you one text. One text because I was stressed. I was overwhelmed. And you decide to nuke my entire life. You are being petty. You are being small. You are ruining the most important day of my life because your feelings got hurt. You are supposed to be the adult here." I walked slowly into the living room and sat down in my favorite leather armchair. I gestured for them to sit, but they remained standing, looming over me like vultures. "It was not just a text, Tiffany," I said, placing my cup on the coaster. "It was a declaration. You said I was no longer family. You said I was an embarrassment. You said my only purpose was to write checks." "I didn't mean it," she shrieked. "Everyone says things they don't mean when they are stressed. You know how much pressure Brad and I are under. His investors are flying in from New York. We have to impress them. We just wanted the day to be perfect. We wanted you there, but maybe just not front and center. We were trying to protect you from the stress." "Protect me," I said. "That is an interesting way to put it." Brad stepped in, putting a hand on Tiffany's shoulder in a mock gesture of comfort. "Look, old man, let's cut the drama. You are clearly having an episode. You are acting like a child who didn't get his way. We are willing to overlook this tantrum if you pick up the phone right now, call Monica and pay the rush fees to get everything back on track. We will tell everyone it was a clerical error. We will save your reputation." "My reputation?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, your reputation," Brad sneered. "If word gets out that Harrison Caldwell canceled his own daughter's wedding out of spite, you will look like a senile fool. People will think you are losing your grip. I am trying to help you here." I looked at him. I looked at the man my daughter intended to marry. I saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance in his stance. He didn't care about me. He didn't even care about Tiffany. He cared about the show. He cared about the image. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Finally, Tiffany sighed, wiping her eyes. "Thank God." "Call her. Fix this, Dad. And transfer the money for the honeymoon jet. The card was declined this morning." It was so embarrassing. I didn't dial Monica. Instead, I opened my voice memo app. I scrolled to a file named Wedding Planner Call. "I am not calling anyone," I said, "but I want you to listen to something." I tapped the screen and turned the volume up to the maximum. The sound of a phone ringing filled the room, followed by the click of a connection. "Hello, this is Monica," the recording began. "Hi, Monica, it's Harrison Caldwell." "Oh, Mr. Caldwell." Monica's voice on the recording was cheerful. "I am so glad you called. I actually had a question about the final invoice. Brad called me last week and made some significant changes." "Changes?" my voice on the recording asked. "Yes, sir. He upgraded the wine package to the Platinum Reserve. He said the $50 bottles were swill and insisted on the $500 vintage. He also added a cigar rolling station and doubled the size of the seafood tower. It added about $40,000 to the bill. 40,000, my recorded voice said. Did he say I approved this? Well, Monica hesitated on the tape. He said, and I quote, "Just put it on the old man's tab. He is so senile he won't even notice the difference. He will sign whatever I put in front of him. He is totally clueless. I just wanted to make sure that was okay with you." The recording ended. The silence in my living room was heavy, suffocating. I looked up at Brad. His face had drained of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. Tiffany looked at Brad, then at me. She didn't look angry at him. She looked terrified that I knew. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. I looked Brad Sterling in the eye. I am not senile, Brad. I am not clueless. And I certainly do not sign whatever is put in front of me. I built a logistic empire while you were still learning how to tie your expensive shoes. I know exactly what goes in and out of my accounts. But Brad stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. That was a joke. I was joking with the planner. It was just banter. Banter, I repeated. Calling the man who is paying for your lifestyle senile is banter. Calling me a clueless old man while spending my money is banter. I turned to Tiffany. She was trembling. Dad, please. He didn't mean it. We just wanted the wedding to be nice. We deserve a nice wedding. You deserve what you can afford, I said, my voice rising for the first time. And based on what I have seen of your finances, you can afford a backyard barbecue, not the Ritz-Carlton. I walked over to the window and looked out at their car parked on my lawn. The faucet is closed, I said without turning around. The wedding is canceled. The credit cards are frozen. The rent payments have stopped. Dad, Tiffany screamed. You can't do that. We have a lease, we have bills, I don't have a job. How are we supposed to live? That sounds like a problem for adults to solve, I said. You told me I wasn't family. You told me to stay away. I am giving you exactly what you asked for, independence. But the house, Brad shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. You signed the gift letter, the house in Lake Forest. That is ours. You can't take that back. It is a legal contract. We are moving in on Monday. I turned back to face them. A cold smile played on my lips. Ah, yes. The house, $4.2 million of prime real estate. The nest egg I promised you. It is ours, Brad insisted. The lawyer has the papers. Yes, she does, I said. But have you checked your email this morning? Or were you too busy trying to call me? What do you mean? Tiffany asked, her voice trembling. I suggest you leave my property, I said. Go home, check your email, read the fine print, and get off my lawn before I call the police and have you trespassed. You are a monster, Tiffany yelled, her face contorted. I hate you. I hope you die alone in this big, empty house. Understood, I said calmly. Now get out. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I watched them get into the car, arguing violently, before they even pulled away. As they tore down the driveway, kicking up gravel and dust, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being cut loose. I sat back down and picked up my coffee. It was cold now, but I drank it anyway. The first battle was over. But the war had just begun. I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. Not with a $4 million house on the line. They were greedy, and greed makes people desperate. But I was ready. I had Sarah Jenkins, the best contract lawyer in the state, on speed dial, and I had a plan. They wanted to play games with the old man. Fine. Let the games begin. Brad stopped with his hand on the brass doorknob. The desperate, pleading look vanished from his face as if he had flipped a switch replaced by a sneer of pure malice. He turned back to me, and for the first time I saw the real Brad Sterling. Not the fumbling groom, not the respectful future son-in-law, but the predator who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. "You think you are smart, Harrison," he said, his voice dropping to a low, cold register that sent a shiver down my spine. "You think cutting off the credit cards hurts us? You think canceling the party matters? That is just noise. You forgot the big piece." I stared at him, my grip tightening on my coffee cup. "Get out of my house, Brad." "Not before I remind you of what you signed last month," he spat back. "The gift letter for the Lake Forest estate. The deed transfer. You signed it in front of a notary. It is a binding promise of a gift. The paperwork is sitting on your lawyer's desk right now, waiting to be filed on Monday morning." He took a step toward me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "That house is worth $4.2 million. And guess what? The gift letter doesn't say anything about a wedding reception. It doesn't say anything about you liking us. It is an unconditional gift. So go ahead, cancel the party. Freeze the cards. On Monday, that house becomes ours. And you know what we are going to do with it?" I didn't answer. I just watched him measuring the threat. "We are going to sell it." Brad laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We are going to list it immediately. We will take the cash, $4 million, and we will never have to listen to your boring stories or beg for your scraps ever again. You just funded our retirement, old man." "Thanks for the golden parachute." He slammed the door in my face. The sound reverberated through the foyer, shaking the crystal chandelier above my head. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood grain of the door. Selling it. They were going to sell the Lake Forest house. That property wasn't just a house. It was a historic estate I had purchased 10 years ago, intending it to be a legacy home for my grandchildren. I had spent countless weekends overseeing the restoration, preserving the gardens, making sure it was perfect. And they were going to liquidate it like a used car to fund their vacuous lifestyle. The rage that filled me then was different from the anger I felt the night before. This was colder, sharper. It was the clarity of a general who realizes the enemy has just revealed their position. Brad had made a fatal error. He had shown me his hand. He thought the game was over, but he didn't realize who he was playing against. I went to the garage and climbed into my vintage Mercedes. I didn't call a driver. I needed to drive myself. I needed the physical action of navigating the Chicago traffic to keep my hands from shaking. I drove straight to the downtown office of Sarah Jenkins, my personal attorney, and one of the few people on this earth I trusted implicitly. Sarah was waiting for me. She had cleared her schedule the moment I called from the car. She met me at the door of her corner office, her expression serious. She was a woman of 50, sharp as a tack, with eyes that missed nothing. She had warned me about Brad a year ago, but like a fool, I hadn't listened. "Sit down, Harrison," she said, pouring me a glass of water. "You look like you have gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight." "I feel like it, Sarah," I admitted, sinking into the chair opposite her desk. "But we don't have time for pleasantries. The Lake Forest house. The gift deed." "What is the status?" Sarah pulled a thick file from her desk drawer. "It is right here. Signed by you, notarized, ready for recording. My paralegal was scheduled to take it to the recorder of deeds on Monday morning, as per your instructions last month." "Is it irrevocable?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Can I tear it up?" Sarah frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Technically, a gift promise can be revoked before delivery. However, because there was a reliance on the gift, they moved out of their apartment. They made plans they could sue for specific performance. It would be a messy legal battle, Harrison. They could tie up the property for years, and given the document you signed, a judge might side with them. Brad knows this. That is why he is so confident." I closed my eyes. So he was right. I handed them a $4 million weapon to use against me. Sarah leaned forward. "Harrison, why the sudden urgency? What happened?" I told her what Brad said. I told her about the plan to sell the house immediately. I told her about the disrespect, the cruelty, the way he looked at my legacy as nothing more than a quick cash grab. Sarah's face hardened. She tapped her pen against the desk, her legal mind working through the permutations. He wants to flip it. He doesn't want a home. He wants a payday. Exactly, I said. I need to stop it. I cannot let them have that house. Not now. Not ever. Sarah opened the file and read through the document again. Then a slow, shark-like smile spread across her face. Harrison, there might be a way. You signed the gift letter, yes, but the deed of transfer itself. The actual document that conveys title. I looked at her, hope sparking in my chest. What about it? It hasn't been recorded yet, she said. And crucially, we haven't executed the final transfer of possession. We can add an addendum, a condition precedent, a condition I repeated. Yes, Sarah said, pulling a fresh legal pad toward her. This was a wedding gift, correct? The entire premise of the gift was their union. Yes. Then we codify that, Sarah said, writing furiously. We don't cancel the gift. That would trigger a lawsuit. Instead, we clarify the terms of delivery. We draft a simple addendum stating that the transfer of title is contingent upon the completion of a legal marriage ceremony and the submission of a certified marriage certificate to this office. I looked at her, the gears turning in my head. A marriage certificate. Exactly, Sarah continued. No marriage, no house. And here's the kicker. We add a clause that says the property cannot be sold, transferred, or encumbered against for a period of 5 years following the marriage without the donor's written consent, to ensure, legally speaking, that the gift is used for its intended purpose as a marital home. I sat back, a laugh bubbling up in my throat. It was brilliant. It was vicious. It was perfect. Do it, I said. Draft it now. But Harrison, Sarah warned, her voice dropping. You need to understand what this means. If you present this to them now, they might just go to the courthouse, get married by a judge, and come back with the certificate just to spite you. They will still get the house even if they can't sell it immediately. I shook my head. No, Sarah. You don't know Brad. He needs the money now. He is desperate. I saw it in his eyes. And Tiffany. She wants the fairy tale. She won't settle for a courthouse signature. They are trapped in their own vanity. So what is the play? Sarah asked. Do we send this to them? No, I said, standing up and walking to the window. We don't send it. We wait. Brad thinks he has won. He thinks the paperwork is already done. Let him think that. Let him think he has beaten the old man. I turned back to Sarah. I want you to hold the papers. When they come to you on Monday demanding the deed, you tell them there is one final administrative step. You make them sign the addendum, then right before you hand over the keys, you tell them it is just standard boilerplate to finalize the transfer. And if they read it, Brad won't read it, I said with certainty. He is too arrogant. He thinks I am a clueless old man who signs whatever is put in front of him. He said so himself. Let's use his arrogance against him. I want them to walk down that aisle thinking they have won the lottery. I want them to say their vows thinking they are securing a fortune, because when they find out the truth, when they realize the house is locked down and the cash flow is gone, the real show will begin. I want to see if their love can survive without my money lubricating the wheels. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You are playing a dangerous game, Harrison. You are baiting them. I am not baiting them, Sarah. I am testing them. If they really love each other, if this marriage is real, then a 5-year restriction on selling the house won't matter. They will have a beautiful home to live in. But if this is a transaction, if Brad is just using my daughter for a payout, then he will run, Sarah finished. Exactly, I said. And if he runs, I save my daughter. It is a win-win. I left Sarah's office with a lighter step. The sun seemed brighter on the Chicago streets. I had a plan. I had a weapon. Brad thought he had a trump card, but he didn't know that I had changed the rules of the game while he was busy celebrating his victory. I drove home, my mind racing. I needed them to believe the wedding was still their path to the gold. I needed to let them think that despite my outburst, despite the cancellation, the prize at the end of the tunnel was still waiting for them. I needed them to walk into the trap with their eyes wide open, blinded by their own greed. When I got back to the estate, I saw my phone blinking with a new message. It was from Tiffany. "Fine. Stay home. Be a grumpy old man. We don't need you. We are going to have the best wedding ever, and then we are going to our new house and we are going to forget you exist. Brad says we are going to be so rich, we won't even remember your name." I looked at the message and typed a reply, my fingers moving steadily over the glass. "Make sure you get a marriage certificate," I wrote. "It is important for the records." I hit send. It was the truth. It was the most important document of their lives, just not for the reasons they thought. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to step into it. Driving away from Sarah's office, the adrenaline that had fueled my counterattack began to ebb, replaced by a cold, gnawing suspicion. Brad's words kept echoing in the quiet cabin of my Mercedes. "We are going to sell it. We are going to list it immediately." It wasn't just the greed that bothered me. It was the urgency. Why would a successful investment consultant, a man who claimed to manage millions in assets, be so desperate to liquidate a prime piece of real estate the moment he got the keys? A young couple starting their life together usually dreams of filling rooms with furniture, not flipping the property for a quick cash injection. Brad had spoken with the frantic energy of a man cornered, a man who wasn't looking for a nest egg but a lifeline. The more I thought about it, the less his story added up. The expensive cars were leased. The penthouse was rented. The dinners were always on credit cards. I had assumed it was just the typical behavior of the nouveau riche, living beyond their means to impress their peers. But what if it was something worse? What if the facade wasn't just thin but completely hollow? I realized I didn't actually know anything about Brad Sterling. I knew what Tiffany told me. I knew what his shiny business card said. But I had never seen a client list. I had never seen a tax return. I had let my daughter's happiness blind me to the due diligence I would have performed on any business partner. And make no mistake, entering a family is a business partnership. I couldn't go home. The silence of the empty house would just amplify the questions in my head. I pulled over to the side of the road and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't used in 5 years. Mike Vance. Mike was a former Chicago police detective who had gone private after 20 years on the force. He specialized in forensic accounting and background checks for corporate mergers. He was expensive, discreet, and terrifyingly thorough. If Brad Sterling had so much as a parking ticket from 2010, Mike would find it. I dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Mike," I said. "It is Harrison Caldwell." Harrison Mike's voice was like gravel in a mixer. "I haven't heard from you since the merger in '98. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need a rush job, Mike. 24 hours. I need a full financial autopsy and surveillance report on a man named Brad Sterling." "The groom?" Mike asked. "Word travels fast in this city. I heard the wedding was off." "It is complicated," I said. "I need to know who he really is, Mike, not who he says he is. I need to know his debts, his assets, his associates. And I need to know why a man would be desperate to sell a $4 million house the second he gets the deed." "I will get to work," Mike said. "I will meet you at your place tomorrow at noon. Have a drink ready for me." The next 24 hours were an exercise in patience. I went through the motions of living. I ate dinner. I slept fitfully. I ignored the barrage of texts from Tiffany, who had switched tactics from anger to emotional manipulation, sending me photos of us from her childhood with captions like, "Remember when we were happy, I didn't reply." Those memories were real, but they belonged to a past that Brad was actively trying to pawn for cash. At exactly noon the next day, Mike Vance pulled up to my gate in a nondescript gray sedan. He looked exactly the same as I remembered, a square block of a man in a rumpled suit carrying a thick manila envelope that looked heavy enough to break a table. We sat in the study. I poured him a Scotch neat, just the way he liked it. He took a sip, set the glass down, and tossed the envelope onto the desk. It landed with a dull, ominous thud. "You are not going to like this, Harrison," he said. "In fact, you are going to want to kill him, but you can't, because then you would go to jail and he isn't worth it." "Tell me," I said, bracing myself. Mike opened the folder and spread a series of documents across the mahogany surface. "First off, Brad Sterling isn't an investment consultant. He is not registered with the SEC. He has no license. The firm he claims to work for, Sterling Capital, it is a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. It has zero assets and zero income." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "So he is unemployed?" "Worse," Mike said. "He is a professional gambler, and a bad one." Mike slid a stack of printouts toward me. They were betting logs from offshore sports books and underground casinos in the city. "He chases losses, Harrison. He bets big on long shots, loses, and then bets double to try and win it back. It is a classic spiral. Over the last 2 years, he has blown through about $300,000. "Where did he get that money?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "Credit cards, mostly. Yours, probably. But when those maxed out, he went to the sharks." Mike pointed to a grainy photograph taken with a long-range lens. It showed Brad arguing with a man in a leather jacket outside a pool hall on the south side. The man in the jacket was poking a finger into Brad's chest. Brad looked terrified. "That is Vinnie Moretti," Mike explained. "He is a loan shark, not the kind that breaks your thumbs, the kind that makes you disappear. Brad owes him $680,000. The interest is compounding daily. The deadline for payment was yesterday." My breath caught in my throat. Yesterday. The day of the wedding. "Exactly," Mike said. "That is why he needs the house. He doesn't want to live there. He needs to liquidate it immediately to pay off Moretti before he ends up in a foundation somewhere. He is not marrying your daughter for love, Harrison. He is marrying her because she is the key to the real estate that saves his life. He is literally trading her future for his survival." I stared at the photo of Brad sweating and cowering. It all made sense now. The rush to get married, the insistence on the expensive gifts, the desperation when I threatened to cut him off. He was a drowning man trying to use my daughter as a raft. "But there is more, isn't there?" I asked, looking at Mike's face. "You said I would want to kill him. This makes me want to ruin him, but murder. That usually requires something personal." Mike sighed and reached into the back of the folder. He pulled out a second stack of photos. "He is not doing this alone," Mike said softly. "He has a partner, someone who is helping him keep Tiffany distracted while he sets up the con." He slid the photos across the desk. The first one showed Brad at a restaurant sitting at a corner table. He wasn't alone. A woman was sitting across from him, leaning in close, her hand resting intimately on his. I recognized her instantly. It was Ashley. Ashley was Tiffany's best friend since college. She was the maid of honor. She was the one who had planned the bachelorette party. She was the one who had toasted to their eternal happiness at the engagement dinner, crying tears of joy. In the photo, she wasn't crying. She was laughing. I flipped to the next photo. It was taken through the window of an apartment. Brad and Ashley were kissing. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was passionate, possessive. "And here are the text logs," Mike said, handing me a transcript. We cloned his phone for an hour while he was at the gym. I read the messages. They were dated from 2 days ago, right after I sent the text saying I wasn't coming to the wedding. Brad, the old man, is balking. He might cut the funding. Ashley, you have to fix it. We need that house. Brad, I know, I am working on it. Once we get the deed, we sell, pay off Vinny, and take the rest to Cabo. Just you and me. Ashley, what about the Princess Brad? We leave her the debt. By the time she realizes the house is gone, we will be on a beach. She is so stupid she won't even see it coming. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook so hard the paper rattled. Cabo. They were going to take my money, sell my house, pay off his gambling debts, and then run away together, leaving my daughter abandoned, heartbroken, and possibly liable for whatever other financial messes he had created in her name. It wasn't just greed. It was a conspiracy. A calculated, cruel dismantling of my daughter's life by the two people she trusted most in the world. Ashley was supposed to be her sister. Brad was supposed to be her husband. And they were laughing about leaving her with nothing. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawn Brad had parked on just yesterday. The rage was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that felt like iron in my veins. They called me a clueless old man. They thought I was an easy mark. They thought Tiffany was stupid. They were about to find out that the Caldwell family didn't produce victims. We produced survivors. I turned back to Mike. Can you get me everything? The debt records, the photos, the text messages. I want it all digitized. I want it ready for a presentation. It is already done, Mike said. It is on this flash drive. What are you going to do with it? Go to the police? No, I said, picking up the small silver drive. The police can't help Tiffany see the truth. She is in love. If I show her this now, she will think I faked it. She will think I am trying to sabotage her happiness. She needs to see it with her own eyes. She needs to see it happen in real time. I looked at the calendar on my desk. The wedding was in 48 hours. Mike, I said, I have a job for you. I need you to find Vinny Moretti. Don't pay him. Just tell him that his money is coming on Saturday. Tell him he might want to be in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton around noon to collect. Mike grinned a slow, dangerous expression. You are going to blow it up. I am not going to blow it up, I corrected him. I am going to let them blow themselves up. I am just going to provide the lighting. I picked up my phone. I had a call to make. It was time to reinstate the wedding. It was time to give Brad and Tiffany exactly what they wanted. A ceremony they would never forget. And I needed to make sure the venue was equipped with a very large, very high-definition projector screen, because the toast I was planning required visual aids. I sat in my study with the silver flash drive weighing heavy in my palm, looking at the device that contained the nuclear option. The evidence Mike Vance had gathered was irrefutable. Photos of Brad kissing Ashley, gambling records, debts to loan sharks, text messages plotting to leave my daughter destitute. Any rational person looking at this would run for the hills. But Tiffany was not rational. Not right now. She was intoxicated by a cocktail of infatuation, vanity, and the desperate need to prove to her high society friends that she had snagged a winner. I knew my daughter. If I drove to her apartment right now and threw these photos on her table, she wouldn't thank me. She would accuse me of photoshopping them. She would scream that I hired actors to frame her fiancé because I was a bitter, jealous old man who couldn't stand to see her happy. Brad, being the master manipulator he was, would spin a story about how that was his cousin in the photo, or how the texts were taken out of context, or how he was actually undercover for the FBI. It sounded ridiculous, but love makes people believe the impossible. To save her, I couldn't just tell her the truth. I had to make her see it. I had to make her feel it. I needed a stage big enough so that she couldn't look away a moment, so public and undeniable that Brad couldn't charm his way out of it. I needed the wedding to happen. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the afternoon. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday. I had less than 48 hours to reverse the hurricane I had started. I had to swallow my pride. I had to become the very thing they accused me of being: a weak, lonely old man, desperate for connection, willing to buy affection, because he had nothing else to offer. It was the hardest role I would ever have to play, but for the sake of the endgame, I had to be Oscar-worthy. I picked up the phone and called Monica first. She answered on the first ring, sounding exhausted. I told her to uncancel everything. Rehire the band, reorder the flowers, prep the food. I told her I would pay double the rush fees to make it happen. I could hear the relief in her voice mixed with a professional wariness. She thought I was unstable, vacillating between rage and regret. Good. Let her think that. It added to the illusion. Then I dialed Tiffany. She didn't answer the first time, or the second. She was making me work for it, punishing me with silence. Finally, on the third attempt, she picked up. What do you want? Her voice was ice cold, sharp enough to cut glass. We are busy packing. Since you kicked us out of our lives, we have a lot to do, Tiffany. Please don't hang up, I said, injecting a tremor into my voice that wasn't entirely fake. I have been sitting here alone in this big house looking at photos of your mother. I have been thinking about what you said. There was silence on the line. She was listening. I was wrong, I said. My pride got the better of me. You are right. I am an old man, and sometimes I get confused and angry when I feel left out. But the thought of you not having your dream day, it is breaking my heart. I cannot do this to you. You already did it, Harrison, she snapped, though the use of my name instead of Dad still stung like a whip. You humiliated us. Brad is a wreck. I know, I continued, adopting a tone of pathetic desperation. But I fixed it. I just got off the phone with Monica. Everything is back on. The Ritz, the flowers, the wine, all of it. I paid the rush fees. It is all reinstated. I heard a gasp on the other end. You put it back, yes. And the credit cards. I unfreezed them. You can pay for the jet. You can pay for whatever you need. I just want you to be happy. There was a muffled sound, like she was covering the phone to whisper to someone. I knew Brad was right there listening, probably calculating how much credit was available on the Amex. After a moment, she came back on the line. Her voice was less hostile, but suspicious. And what about the house? You said you were keeping the house. The house, I sighed as if the fight had left my body. The house is yours. I talked to Sarah Jenkins. I told her to prepare the final transfer. It is my wedding gift to you. I shouldn't have threatened to take it away. It was petty, so we get the deed on Monday, she asked, the greed seeping back into her tone. No, I said. I want to make this right. I want to make this official. Sarah will bring the deed to the wedding. I will sign the irrevocable transfer of title right there during the reception, the moment you two are introduced as husband and wife. It will be part of the celebration, a public declaration that I support you. I could practically hear Brad salivating in the background. A public signing meant witnesses. It meant I couldn't back out later without looking like a monster. It was exactly what they wanted. Okay, Tiffany said, trying to suppress her excitement. Okay, that sounds acceptable. But there is still the other issue. The condition. The condition, I asked innocently. You are not coming, she said firmly. That hasn't changed. We are glad you are paying for it, and we appreciate the house, but Brad and I agree that your presence would just be tense. After the scene you caused yesterday, it would be awkward for everyone. We want a drama-free day. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to throw the phone against the wall. She was taking my money, taking my house, and still banning me from the room. It was the ultimate disrespect. But it was also perfect for my plan. If I wasn't there, they would let their guard down. They wouldn't be watching me. I understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If that is what you want, I will stay home. I will wait to hear about it. Sarah will be there with the papers. You won't even have to see me. Fine, Tiffany said. Thank you for coming to your senses. We have a lot to do. Don't call us again until next week. She hung up. I sat there for a moment, the silence of the room rushing back in. I felt dirty. I felt like I had just sold my soul. But then I looked at the computer screen on my desk. When I hired Mike Vance, part of the package included a comprehensive digital surveillance suite. Since I paid for Tiffany's phone plan and the device was registered in my name, it was legally gray but technically permissible for me to mirror her device. I had never used it before. I respected her privacy. But war changes the rules of engagement. I opened the dashboard. A few minutes later, a group chat notification popped up on the screen. It was a thread titled The Dream Team. The participants were Tiffany, Brad, and Ashley. I watched in real time as the messages rolled in. Tiffany, OMG, guys. You won't believe it. The old man caved. Completely. Ashley, no way did he reinstate the venue, Tiffany, everything. And he unfreezed the cards. And get this, he is signing the house over at the reception. He is literally bringing the deed to the party. Brad, I told you. I told you he was weak. He is terrified of dying alone. All we had to do was push him a little. Tiffany. He sounded so pathetic on the phone, begging for forgiveness. It was kind of sad, honestly. But whatever. We won. Ashley, so the Cabo plan is back on Brad better. With the deed signed on Saturday, I can have the listing agreement ready for Sunday morning. I already called the broker. We can have a cash offer by Tuesday. We sell pay off my investors, which I knew meant the loan sharks, and then we are gone. Tiffany. I can't believe he actually agreed not to come. He is paying for a $500,000 party he isn't even invited to. What a loser. Brad. He is a cash cow, babe. That is all he is. Once we have the house money, we put him in a home, one of those state-run ones. Let him rot. He has served his purpose. I read the words on the screen. Let him rot. He has served his purpose. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. It was the feeling a surgeon has before cutting out a tumor. They weren't my family. They were a malignancy, and I was the scalpel. I took a screenshot of the chat, then another. Then I exported the entire conversation history. This was the final nail in the coffin. I picked up the phone and called Mike Vance. It is a go, I said. The wedding is back on. Good, Mike said. I found the AV guy for the Ritz. He owes me a favor from a case I worked last year. He is going to give us full access to the projection system. Perfect, I said. I want you to edit a video. I am sending you a folder of screenshots, photos, and financial documents. I want it set to music. Maybe something romantic like the song they chose for their first dance. You are a cold man, Harrison. Mike chuckled. I like it. What about the house papers? Oh, Sarah is handling. That I said. She is preparing a very special document. It looks like a deed transfer. It feels like a deed transfer. But the fine print, well, let's just say the fine print is going to be the surprise ending they never saw coming. I spent the rest of the evening in the library organizing the final details. I checked in with Sarah, who confirmed she had the special documents ready. I checked in with the private security team I had hired to stand by at the Ritz, just in case Brad got violent when his world collapsed. I checked in with the bank to ensure the wedding payments cleared so there would be no hiccups before the main event. As night fell, I poured myself one last glass of bourbon. I looked at the empty chair where Catherine used to sit. I am doing this for her. Cat, I whispered to the empty room. I am saving her from a life of misery with a con man. She will hate me for it. She might never speak to me again. But at least she will be free. And at least she will still have a roof over her head, even if she doesn't know it yet. My phone buzzed again. Another notification from the group chat. Brad, just ordered bottle service for the club tonight. Put it on Harrison's card. Let's celebrate the jackpot. Ashley, 2. 10 the jackpot. Tiffany, 2. The jackpot. I raised my glass to the screen. To the jackpot, I said softly. Enjoy it while it lasts, kids. Because the hangover is going to be brutal. I went to bed early. I needed to be well rested. I wasn't going to the wedding, but I had a front row seat to the live stream Mike was setting up. And I didn't want to miss a single frame of the moment they realized the clueless old man had just checkmated them both. Saturday arrived with a mocking brilliance, the kind of perfect sun-drenched afternoon that usually signals a fairy tale ending. At the Ritz-Carlton downtown, the grand ballroom had been transformed into a palace of white orchids and imported silk. I knew the specifications intimately because I had signed the checks for every single petal. The floral arrangements alone cost $18,500. The vintage champagne chilling in silver buckets cost another $12,000. It was a masterpiece of excess, a stage set for a romance that was as hollow as the chocolate truffles placed on the 200 gold-rimmed plates. I was not there to smell the flowers or taste the wine. I was sitting in my leather armchair, in the study of my empty house, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. On my desk, 3 high-definition monitors were set up, fed by a secure live stream from the discreet cameras Mike Vance had installed throughout the ballroom. I had a view of the head table, a view of the dance floor, and a wide shot of the entire room. I poured myself a glass of iced water. My hands were steady. My heart was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. This wasn't a celebration. It was an execution, and I was the executioner. On the center screen, I saw my daughter. Tiffany looked breathtaking in a custom Vera Wang gown that had cost me $25,000. She was glowing radiant, with the triumph of a woman who believes she has secured her future. She moved through the crowd of Chicago's elite, accepting compliments, flashing the 3-carat diamond ring that Brad had bought with my money. She looked happy. It was a fragile, ignorant happiness, the kind a lamb feels before the slaughter, and looking at her, I felt a sharp pang of sorrow. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to rush in there and pull her away before the roof caved in. But I knew that saving her now would only doom her later. She had to see the fire to understand that she had been playing with matches. Next to her stood Brad Sterling. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch, looking every inch the successful investment banker he pretended to be. He was laughing, clapping men on the back, soaking in the admiration. He looked like a man who had just pulled off the heist of the century. Every few minutes he would glance toward the entrance, probably checking for Sarah Jenkins, waiting for the lawyer who would hand him the deed to the $4.2 million estate in Lake Forest. He didn't know Sarah was currently waiting in the wings, holding a document that would strangle his dreams, but that was a surprise for later. I leaned into the microphone on my desk. "Mike, are we ready?" Mike's voice came back through my earpiece, crisp and professional. "All systems green, Harrison. The projector is linked to my laptop. The audio is patched in. Security is in position at the stage exits. We are just waiting for your signal. Wait for the speeches," I said. "Let them get comfortable. Let them think they have won." I watched for another hour as the guests took their seats. The dinner service began. I watched Brad lean over and whisper something to Tiffany, and she giggled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Then I saw him wink at Ashley, the maid of honor, seated just 2 chairs away. Ashley smiled back, a secretive, knowing smile that made my stomach turn. They were mocking my daughter at her own wedding right in front of her face. The time had come. The master of ceremonies walked to the microphone. He wasn't the usual DJ provided by the hotel. He was a man named Marcus, a professional I had hired specifically for this moment, because he could follow a script without flinching. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus boomed his voice, filling the ballroom and my study simultaneously. "If I could have your attention, please." The room quieted down. The clinking of silverware stopped. 200 faces turned toward the stage. Usually at this time we would have the father of the bride give a toast. Marcus continued, his tone somber. "However, as many of you know, Mr. Harrison Caldwell could not be here today due to health reasons." I saw Brad smirk. He whispered something to Tiffany, probably a joke about the senile old man rotting at home. However, Marcus said, his voice brightening, "Mr. Caldwell wanted to be here in spirit. And the groom, Mr. Sterling, has prepared a very special surprise for his bride. Instead of a traditional photo montage, he wanted to share some secret promises, some hidden moments that truly define their relationship." Tiffany clapped her hands together, looking delighted. She looked at Brad, confused but excited. Brad looked confused too. He hadn't prepared a video. He looked around, trying to catch the eye of the wedding planner, but the lights suddenly dimmed, plunging the ballroom into darkness. The massive projection screen behind the head table descended from the ceiling. A spotlight hit it. I took a deep breath. "Do it, Mike." The video began. Soft romantic music filled the room, the opening chords of their chosen first dance song. On the screen, a beautiful photo of Tiffany and Brad in Paris appeared. The crowd murmured in appreciation. It faded into a photo of them on a boat in Lake Michigan. Then the music stopped abruptly, with the sound of a record scratch. The screen went black for a second. When the image returned, it wasn't a photo. It was a screenshot of a text message thread. The font was blown up large enough for everyone in the back row to read. The contact name at the top was Brad. The recipient was Ashley, maid of honor. The text read, "God, she is so annoying today. I can't wait until this is over and we get the house." A ripple of confusion went through the room. People squinted. Tiffany froze, her smile wavering. The slide changed. Another text message. "Ashley, how much do you think we can get for the Lake Forest place? Brad Zillow says 4.2 million. We list it Monday morning. Quick sale for 3.8 cash. We pay off Vinny and we take the rest to Cabo. Just you and me, baby." The silence in the ballroom was total. It was a vacuum devoid of air. Then the next slide. A photo. It was the one Mike Vance had taken through the restaurant window. Brad and Ashley holding hands, looking into each other's eyes with undeniable intimacy. Then another photo. Brad and Ashley kissing in the parking lot of my daughter's apartment building. The gasp that went through the room was audible even through the speakers in my study. It sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room at once. Tiffany stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking so hard she knocked over her champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and violent in the silence. She stared at the screen, her mouth open, her eyes wide with a horror that was painful to witness. But the video wasn't done. The audio kicked in. It was a recording of a voicemail Brad had left for his bookie. "Look, Vinny, back off, okay? The old man is a clueless idiot. He is signing the house over on Saturday. I will have your money by Tuesday. The girl is stupid. She thinks I am some big-shot investor. Once I get the deed, I am gone. You will get your cash." Brad's voice, unmistakable and arrogant, echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The screen flashed one final image. A screenshot of the group chat I had intercepted just days ago. "Brad, we put him in a home. One of those state-run ones. Let him rot. He has served his purpose." The video cut to black. The lights slammed back on, blindingly bright. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. It was a tableau of absolute devastation. Tiffany stood like a statue, her face draining of blood until she looked like a ghost in a wedding dress. Ashley, seated at the head table, had her hands over her mouth, shrinking back into her chair. Then chaos erupted. Brad jumped up his chair, clattering backward. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "That is fake," he screamed, his voice cracking. "That is AI. Someone hacked the system. It is a lie. Harrison did this. He is crazy." He pointed a shaking finger at the projection booth. Turn it off right now." He scrambled over the table, knocking over flower arrangements and wine glasses, staining the white tablecloths with crimson liquid that looked like blood. He was running toward the stage, toward the laptop that held his destruction, as if destroying the machine would erase the truth everyone had just seen. He didn't make it. From the shadows near the kitchen entrance, two men in dark suits stepped forward. They were large, imposing, and moved with professional speed. They were part of the private security detail I had hired for this exact moment. Brad lunged for the stage steps, but the first guard caught him by the shoulder. Brad swung a wild punch fueled by panic and adrenaline. The guard blocked it effortlessly and spun Brad around, pinning his arms behind his back. "Let me go," Brad shouted, thrashing against the restraint. "This is illegal. You can't do this." The guests were on their feet now. Tiffany's mother was screaming. People were holding up their phones, recording everything. The live stream of my revenge was already being broadcast to the world. I watched Tiffany. She hadn't moved. She was staring at Brad, who was now being held firmly by the security team. She looked at Ashley, who was trying to sneak away toward the exit. Tiffany's eyes locked onto her best friend. The shock on her face began to fracture, replaced by a raw, primal rage. She picked up the nearest object, a heavy crystal vase filled with white roses I had paid for, and hurled it. It missed Ashley by inches, shattering against the wall. Tiffany screamed a sound so full of pain it made the speakers crackle. "You were my sister." The ballroom descended into madness. Waiters dropped trays. Guests scrambled to get out of the way. I sat in my study watching the feed. I took a sip of my water. It was cool and refreshing. The nightmare had begun for them. For me, it was the first moment of truth we had shared in years. But I wasn't done. The humiliation was just the opening act. Now came the financial reality. Now came the eviction. Now came the consequences of betting against Harrison Caldwell. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Sarah Jenkins, who was standing in the back of the ballroom, clutching a leather folder. "Execute Phase 2, I wrote. I watched on the screen as Sarah checked her phone, nodded once at the security camera she knew I was watching through, and began walking toward the sobbing bride. The house was not going to be sold. It wasn't even going to be gifted. It was about to become the ultimate symbol of what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. The silence in the ballroom shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, matching the ruin of the crystal vase Tiffany had just hurled. On my monitors, the scene transformed from a high society wedding into a chaotic brawl that would have looked more at home in a dive bar than the Ritz-Carlton. Tiffany, the girl who used to cry over a broken fingernail, lunged at Brad with the ferocity of a wounded animal. She didn't slap him. She clawed at him. Her manicured nails, the ones I had paid $200 for just yesterday, tore into the lapels of his bespoke tuxedo, shredding the fabric, as she screamed incoherently. It wasn't just anger. It was the humiliation of a woman who realized she had been sold for a gambling debt. Brad tried to fend her off, his hands raised in a pathetic defense, but he was restrained by my security team, leaving him helpless against the fury of the bride he had planned to defraud. In the periphery of the chaos, I saw Ashley move. The maid of honor, the best friend, the traitor. She didn't try to help Brad. She didn't try to comfort Tiffany. She grabbed her purse and sprinted toward the service exit, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. She disappeared into the kitchen, a rat fleeing the sinking ship she had helped drill holes in. Tiffany didn't even notice her go. She was too busy ripping the boutonniere off Brad's chest and throwing it in his face. Then the doors to the main lobby swung open. The guests, who had been frozen in a state of horrified voyeurism, parted like the Red Sea. 3 men walked in. They didn't look like wedding guests. They wore leather jackets and jeans, and the man in the center had a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. It was Vinnie Moretti. Mike Vance had delivered the message perfectly. Vinnie wasn't there for the cake. He was there for his $680,000. Brad saw him and stopped struggling against my security guards. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse standing upright. Vinnie walked right up to the edge of the dance floor, ignoring the screaming bride and the shocked socialites. He locked eyes with Brad and smiled a cold, predatory baring of teeth. He pointed to his watch, then to the floor. The message was clear. Time was up. But Vinnie wouldn't get his money today. Before the loan shark could take another step, the side doors burst open again. This time it wasn't criminals. It was the Chicago Police Department. 4 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in suits marched into the ballroom. They weren't there for the noise complaint. They were there for the file I had sent over via Aisha Jackson. Mr. Bradley Sterling, one of the detectives, announced, his voice booming over the sobbing and the murmurs. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." The handcuffs clicked onto Brad's wrists before he could even stammer a denial. As they dragged him away, past the stunned guests, past the loan shark who looked annoyed to be cheated out of his vengeance, and past the woman he was supposed to marry. Brad looked directly at the camera. He knew I was watching. He screamed something, but it was lost in the cacophony of the crowd. It didn't matter what he said. He was done. The con was over. The ballroom slowly emptied. The guests fled as quickly as they could, whispering into their phones, eager to be the first to spread the gossip of the decade. The security team escorted Vinnie and his associates out. The police took Brad away in the back of a cruiser. The hotel staff began to nervously clear the broken glass. And then there was only Tiffany. She stood alone in the center of the dance floor, surrounded by the debris of her shattered dream. Her $25,000 dress was stained with wine and torn at the shoulder. Her veil was askew. Her makeup ran in dark streaks down her face. She looked small. She looked broken. For a fleeting second, the father in me wanted to go to her, to wrap her in a coat and take her home, but I stayed in my chair. I took a sip of water. The lesson wasn't over yet. She was suffering, yes, but she hadn't learned. She looked around the empty room, her chest heaving. Then she reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out her phone. My phone on the desk lit up. She wasn't calling to apologize. She wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. She was calling to scream. I answered on the first ring, putting it on speaker so her voice filled my study. "You did this," she shrieked, her voice raw and hoarse. You knew the whole time." I sat calmly watching her on the screen as she paced back and forth like a caged tiger. "I did know, Tiffany. I found out 3 days ago. Then why didn't you tell me?" she wailed. "Why did you let me put on the dress? Why did you let people come? You humiliated me, Harrison. You made me a laughingstock in front of all of Chicago. You could have just told me privately. You could have stopped it." "I could have," I agreed, my voice steady. "But would you have believed me if I had come to you 3 days ago and told you Brad was a con man and your best friend was his lover? Would you have thanked me, or would you have called me a jealous, senile old man and cut me out of your life anyway?" She stopped pacing. She breathed heavily into the phone. "That doesn't matter. You destroyed my life to prove a point. You are sick. You are a sad, vindictive old man. I am the man who just saved you from marrying a felon who was planning to sell your assets and leave you with nothing but debt," I corrected her. "You should be thanking me." "I will never thank you," she screamed. "You ruined everything, and now I have nothing." "My friends saw that video. My reputation is gone." "Your reputation is the least of your worries," I said. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "You have to fix this. You have to make it right. I need a settlement. I need compensation for the emotional distress you caused today." I almost laughed. Even in the wreckage, her entitlement was a cockroach that refused to die. "Compensation." "Yes," she insisted. "And the house, I want the keys to the Lake Forest house. Sarah is there, right? Tell her to give me the deed. It is the least you can do after what you put me through. I need a place to go. I can't go back to the apartment. It reminds me of him. I want my house, Harrison. It is mine. You signed the gift letter. I leaned forward, looking closely at her image on the monitor. She really believed it. She really thought that after plotting to throw me in a nursing home, after calling me a cash cow, she could still demand her inheritance. Tiffany, I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute finality. You need to listen to me very closely. There is no house. What, she gasped. You signed the papers. You said Sarah was bringing them. Sarah is there, I said. Go ask her. She is standing by the exit. Go read the document I prepared for today. I watched on the screen as Tiffany ran toward the exit where Sarah Jenkins was waiting, holding a blue leather folder. Sarah opened the folder and handed Tiffany a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a deed. It was the addendum we had drafted. I heard Tiffany reading it over the phone, her breathing hitching. Transfer of title is contingent upon the submission of a valid marriage certificate. She looked up at the security camera, her eyes wild. But there was no wedding. Brad was arrested. Exactly, I said. The gift was a wedding gift, Tiffany. A gift for a marriage. No marriage, no gift. The condition precedent was not met. The contract is void. The house in Lake Forest remains the sole property of Harrison Caldwell. No, she screamed, crumpling the paper in her fist. You can't do this. I have nowhere to go. I promised a lot of things, I said. I promised to love you and support you, and you promised to treat me like a father, not an ATM. We both broke our promises, didn't we? She started to cry again, a low, keening sound of despair. Dad, please. I am your daughter. I am alone. Brad is gone. Ashley is gone. I have nobody. Let me have the house, just let me live there until I figure this out. I looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. I cannot let you have the house, Tiffany. I am selling it. The listing agent is putting it on the market on Monday. And as for where you are going to live, I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence build. You mentioned the penthouse, the one I pay $8,500 a month for. Yes, she said, hope flaring in her voice. I will go there. I will stay there for a while. You can't, I said. I called the landlord this morning. I exercised the early termination clause in the lease. I paid the penalty fee. The lease is canceled as of today. Canceled, she whispered. Yes. And since the apartment was in my name because your credit score was too low to qualify, the landlord has already changed the digital locks. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings. The movers I hired are already there packing Brad's things to put in storage. Your things will be left in the lobby. You are making me homeless, she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. I am making you independent, I said. You wanted to be free of me. You wanted me to disappear. I have disappeared from your lease. I have disappeared from your bank account. I have disappeared from your safety net. But I don't have any money, she cried. Brad drained our joint account, I know, I said. That is unfortunate. Perhaps you should get a job. I hear the market is very competitive right now. Dad, please, she begged, sinking to her knees on the ballroom floor, her ruined dress pooling around her. I am sorry, I take it back. Just help me. I looked at her kneeling in the wreckage of her own greed. It hurt. It hurt more than anything I had ever done. But I knew that if I helped her now, if I wrote one more check, she would never learn. She would just find another Brad. She would just wait for me to die. You have 24 hours to get your things from the lobby, Tiffany, I said. My voice thick with emotion, I tried to hide. I suggest you hurry. It looks like it is going to rain. I hung up the phone. I severed the connection. On the monitor, I saw Tiffany staring at her silent phone, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, said something briefly to her, and then walked away, leaving my daughter completely and utterly alone in the middle of the empty ballroom. I turned off the monitors. The screens went black. The show was over. The silence in my study was absolute. I sat there in the dark, feeling the tears finally running down my own face. I had won. I had destroyed the enemies at the gate, but the cost was my own heart. I poured another drink, but I didn't drink it. I just sat there waiting for the sun to go down, knowing that somewhere in the city my daughter was finally facing the one thing I had protected her from her entire life. Reality. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke over Chicago, turning the city into a gray, weeping blur. I sat in my study dry and warm, but I felt every drop that was falling on my daughter as she ran out of the Ritz-Carlton. She didn't have an umbrella, she didn't have a coat. She only had the tattered remains of a $25,000 wedding dress and a pair of Jimmy Choo heels that were never designed for running on wet pavement. I knew exactly where she was going. Creatures of habit always retreat to their nests when they are wounded, and Tiffany's nest was the penthouse apartment on the Gold Coast. It was a stunning unit with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a place that cost $8,500 a month. A place she called home, but which I called a line item on my monthly expense report. She probably thought I was bluffing about the eviction. She probably thought that even if I was angry, I wouldn't actually throw her onto the street in the middle of a storm. She still believed in the safety net, because she had never fallen without it catching her. According to the report I received later from the building's concierge, she arrived at the lobby dripping wet, shivering, looking like a drowned swan. She marched past the front desk, head held high, trying to summon the arrogance that had been her armor for so long. She didn't make eye contact with the staff she usually treated like invisible servants. She went straight to the private elevator that led to the penthouse floor. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. Still nothing. The elevator required a key fob, and her fob had been deactivated 20 minutes after I got off the phone with the landlord. She went to the front desk, then demanding to know why the elevator was broken. The concierge, a man named Robert, whom she had never bothered to tip in 3 years, informed her politely that the leaseholder, Mr. Harrison Caldwell, had terminated the contract and vacated the premises. He told her that per the building's policy on immediate lease terminations, access was revoked instantly. Tiffany screamed at him. She threatened to have him fired. She pulled the "Do you know who I am" card, playing it with desperate futility. Robert simply pointed to the service alcove near the mailboxes. There, piled haphazardly on the marble floor, were her belongings. It wasn't everything. It was just what the movers had managed to pack in the 2 hours since I gave the order. Her designer clothes were jammed into cardboard boxes. Her Louis Vuitton luggage, usually treated with reverence, was stacked like garbage. Her jewelry box was sitting on top of a crate of shoes. It was a humiliating pile of materialism stripped of all its context and glamour. She ran to the pile, frantically digging through the boxes, looking for what? Cash keys. A solution to the nightmare. She found nothing but silk and leather. She tried to drag the suitcases toward the elevator, but without a key she had nowhere to go. She couldn't go up. She couldn't stay in the lobby. The concierge told her she couldn't leave her items there, as it was a fire hazard. She had to take them and leave. She dragged her luggage out onto the sidewalk into the pouring rain. She stood there, surrounded by wet cardboard and soaking leather, trying to hail a cab. But cabs in Chicago don't stop for women in torn wedding dresses screaming at the sky. They drove past her, splashing dirty water onto her white gown, turning it gray and heavy. She finally managed to order a rideshare on her phone, watching her battery percentage tick down, realizing that this was the last ride she could afford before her bank account hit zero. She didn't go to a hotel. She didn't go to a friend's house. She went to the only other place she thought she owned. She told the driver to take her to Lake Forest. It was a 45-minute drive, a 45-minute delusion, where she convinced herself that the addendum was a lie, that Sarah Jenkins was bluffing, that the house was still hers because she deserved it. The car dropped her off at the iron gates of the estate as the sun was beginning to set behind the storm clouds. The house looked magnificent in the twilight, the windows dark, the stone walls imposing and solid. It looked like safety. It looked like a fortress against the world. Tiffany ran to the pedestrian gate and punched in the code. Error. She punched it in again. Error. I had changed the codes remotely while she was still crying on the ballroom floor. She rattled the bars, screaming for the caretaker, but I had given the staff the weekend off. There was no one there to hear her but the wind. Then headlights swept across the wet driveway. A black sedan was parked just inside the gate. The door opened and Sarah Jenkins stepped out under a large black umbrella. She didn't open the gate. She walked up to the bars, looking at Tiffany through the iron, like a warden looking at an inmate. "Let me in," Tiffany screamed, gripping the cold metal. "This is my house. You can't lock me out." Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it through the bars. It fell into a puddle at Tiffany's feet. "You have been served," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Tiffany looked at the envelope, then at Sarah. "Served? What are you talking about?" "Open the gate. I am afraid I cannot do that." "Ms. Caldwell," Sarah said calmly. "As of 5 p.m. today, this property has been listed for sale. You have no legal claim to it. The contract you failed to fulfill was quite specific." "I don't care about the contract," Tiffany wailed. "I have nowhere to go. Apartment is gone. Brad is gone. Just let me in." Sarah ignored the plea. She pointed to the envelope in the mud. "That is a formal complaint filed by your father. He is suing you, Tiffany, suing me." "For what?" "For misappropriation of funds," Sarah stated, reciting the charges from memory. "Embezzlement and fraud. You were an authorized user on his credit accounts for specific living expenses. However, the forensic audit completed this morning shows that over the last 12 months, you transferred approximately $200,000 from those cards into cash advances and unauthorized purchases that violate the terms of your user agreement. You used his money to fund Brad Sterling's gambling debts and to pay for illicit travel plans. That is theft, Tiffany." Tiffany stared at her, her mouth agape, the rain plastering her hair to her face. I didn't know. Brad said we could." "Brad is in a holding cell," Sarah interrupted. "He is facing his own charges. But you, Tiffany, you signed the receipts. You made the transfers. Your father is demanding full repayment of the $200,000 plus legal fees. If you cannot pay, he will pursue a judgment against your future wages and assets." "I don't have any assets," Tiffany screamed, hysteria taking over. "I don't have a job. I don't have anything." "Then I suggest you find legal counsel," Sarah said, turning back to her car. "And Tiffany, I wouldn't linger here. This is private property. If you are not gone in 10 minutes, I have instructions to call the sheriff for trespassing." Sarah got into her car and drove up the long driveway toward the house, the taillights disappearing into the gloom. Tiffany was left standing outside the gate, clutching the wet legal papers, the rain washing away the last of her denial. She sank to her knees in the mud. The physical exhaustion finally caught up with the emotional trauma. She looked down at herself. The Vera Wang dress was a ruined gray rag. Her shoes were lost somewhere in the grass. Her diamond ring, the symbol of her fake engagement, felt heavy and cold on her finger. She tried to pull it off, thinking she could pawn it, thinking it might be her lifeline. But then she remembered something Brad had said in one of the text messages I had shown on the screen. He got the diamond from a guy who knows a guy. It's a high-quality cubic zirconia. She will never know the difference. She looked at the ring, really looked at it for the first time, and realized it was fake. Just like the marriage, just like the house, just like the love she thought she had. It was all a piece of glass pretending to be a diamond. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She didn't own anything. Not the clothes on her back, which were bought with my card. Not the phone in her hand, which was on my plan. Not the roof over her head. She had spent 29 years living in a bubble of wealth that she thought was her birthright, never realizing that the bubble was made of my sweat and my labor. She had treated me like a utility, like electricity or water, something that was just there, something she didn't have to be grateful for until it was turned off. And now it was dark. She sat there for a long time, shivering uncontrollably. The reality of her situation settled into her bones deeper than the cold. She was 29 years old. She had a degree she had never used. She had no work history. She had burned her bridges with her family. She was facing a lawsuit from her own father. She was homeless. For the first time in her life, Tiffany Caldwell wasn't the victim of a mean dad or a bad boyfriend. She was the victim of her own choices. She had chosen greed over loyalty. She had chosen image over substance. She had chosen to bite the hand that fed her, and now she was starving. She looked at her phone. 4% battery remaining. She had no one to call. Her society friends wouldn't answer. They were too busy gossiping about her downfall. Her mother had passed away. Her father was the one suing her. She was completely, utterly alone in the dark. She stood up, her legs shaking. She picked up the suitcase that she had managed to drag from the cab. It was heavy, filled with useless designer clothes that were now wet and ruined. She started walking down the dark road toward the train station a mile away. Every step was a struggle. Every step was a lesson. She was walking away from the castle she thought she deserved, walking into a world she was completely unprepared for. I watched the GPS dot on her phone move slowly down the road on my monitor. I didn't send a car. I didn't call to see if she was okay. I just watched. This was the fire she had to walk through. This was the crucible. If she survived this night, if she survived the next few months, she might come out the other side as a human being. If I saved her now, she would stay a parasite forever. I turned off the tracker. I had done my part. The rest was up to her. I sat in the darkness of my study, listening to the rain, praying that the daughter I raised was still somewhere inside that shell of entitlement waiting to be born. But for tonight, she was on her own, and that was the most terrifying, necessary gift I could give her. It was 3 a.m. when the intercom at my Chicago estate buzzed again. It wasn't the aggressive, entitled drone of the previous morning. It was a short, hesitant tap, barely long enough to register. I hadn't slept. I was sitting in the foyer in a high-backed chair facing the door, like a sentry guarding a fortress that had already been breached from the inside. I knew she would come. The instinct for survival always overrides pride eventually, and Tiffany had run out of options. I watched the security monitor. The camera feed showed a figure huddled by the gate that looked less like my daughter and more like a refugee from a war zone. Her wedding dress, once a symbol of her vanity, was now a heavy, mud-stained shroud wrapped around her shivering frame. She had lost her shoes. She was barefoot on the cold pavement. Her hair was matted with rain and dirt. She looked small, defeated, and utterly alone. I pressed the button to open the pedestrian gate. I didn't send a car down the driveway. I didn't rush out with a blanket. I stayed in my chair and waited as she walked the long, winding path to the front door. It took her 10 minutes. I watched every step on the monitors. She was limping. She was crying. And for the first time in her life, she was walking without a safety net. When she finally knocked, it was a weak, scratching sound. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and opened the heavy oak door. Tiffany fell into the foyer. She didn't walk in. She collapsed across the threshold, landing on her knees on the marble floor. She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara and mud, her eyes swollen almost shut. She reached out a trembling hand to grab the hem of my trousers, but I took a step back, keeping myself just out of reach. "Dad," she croaked, her voice raw from hours of screaming and crying. "Please, I am sorry. I am so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything. Brad. He is a monster. He left me. He ruined me. I looked down at her. I saw the desperation. I saw the fear. But I also saw something else. I saw the calculation. She wasn't sorry she had treated me like garbage. She was sorry she had lost the game. She was sorry the bet hadn't paid off. She was blaming Brad, calling him a monster, but she hadn't taken ownership of her own part in the conspiracy. She was still the victim in her own story. I have nowhere to go, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I have no money. I have no phone battery. I walked from the train station. I am cold. Please, Dad, let me come home. I will do anything. I will be good. I promise. Just give me my room back. I need to sleep. I need to eat. Please. She looked up at me again, her eyes pleading. I learned my lesson, okay. You win. You proved your point. Now please stop this. Be my dad again. Save me. It was the moment I had dreaded most. The moment where every instinct as a father screamed at me to pick her up, to call the doctor, to run a hot bath, to tell her it was all just a bad dream. I wanted to fix it. I had spent 29 years fixing it. But I looked at the mud on my floor, the same mud she had dragged through my life for years, and I knew that if I picked her up now, I would be carrying her for the rest of my life. If I saved her tonight, she would learn nothing except that her father was a doormat who could be trampled on and then used to wipe her feet. I didn't offer her a hand. I didn't offer her a towel. I looked at her with a gaze that I hoped conveyed the depth of my sorrow, but also the iron of my resolve. I cannot let you in, Tiffany, I said softly. Her head snapped up. What, but I am your daughter. You made your position very clear 3 days ago, I said, my voice steady. You sent me a message. Do you remember it? You wrote, "You are no longer my family." You said I was just a financier. You said I was an embarrassment. I didn't mean it, she wailed, clutching at her chest. I was angry. Words have meaning. Tiffany. I continued, ignoring her outburst. You are an adult. You are 29 years old. You made a choice to cut me out. You made a choice to defraud me. You made a choice to plot with a criminal to sell my property and put me in a nursing home. She flinched as if I had struck her. You saw the messages, she whispered. I saw everything I said, and I respected your wish. You wanted to be independent. You wanted to be free of the clueless old man. So I am respecting that decision. I am treating you like the stranger you asked to be. Dad, no, she screamed, trying to crawl forward. I will die out there. I don't know how to do anything. That is the problem, isn't it? I asked. You don't know how to do anything because I never forced you to learn. I failed you, Tiffany. I crippled you with money. I made you weak by making your life easy, and I am not going to do it anymore. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Tiffany's eyes tracked the movement. I saw a flicker of hope light up in her gaze. She thought I was reaching for my checkbook. She thought I was reaching for cash. She thought even now that the solution to her problem was financial. I pulled out a plain white envelope and held it out to her. She snatched it from my hand, her fingers muddy and shaking. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the contents frantically. Then she froze. She pulled out the items, staring at them in confusion. There was no check. There was no cash. There was no credit card. In her hand, she held a single one-way Greyhound bus ticket to a town 3 hours south of Chicago. Clipped to it was a voucher for 1 month of prepaid rent at a place called the Bluebird Motel. It wasn't a luxury resort. It was a roadside motel used by transient workers and people starting over. It was clean, it was safe, but it was the bottom rung of the ladder. "What is this?" she whispered, looking up at me with horror. "That is your fresh start," I said. "That is the last penny you will ever receive from Harrison Caldwell." "A bus ticket," she screamed, throwing it on the floor. "A motel? Are you joking? I can't live in a motel. I am Tiffany Caldwell." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "Tiffany Caldwell was a heiress who lived in a penthouse. You are just Tiffany now, a 29-year-old woman with no skills, no job, and a lot of debt." I pointed to the voucher on the floor. "I paid for 30 days. That gives you 1 month to find a job. Any job. Waitress, cleaner, cashier. It doesn't matter. You have a roof over your head for 30 days. You have electricity and water. That is more than most people start with." "You are sending me away," she cried. "Like a dog, I am sending you to reality," I said. "In that town, nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares about your last name. You're going to have to survive on your own merit. You are going to have to work. You are going to have to budget. You are going to have to learn what $1 is actually worth." "I won't go," she defied me, crossing her arms over her ruined dress. "I will sit right here on your porch until you let me in. The neighbors will see. It will be a scandal." "Stay if you want," I said indifferently. "But the sprinklers turn on in 10 minutes, and I have already called the police non-emergency line to report a trespasser. They will be here shortly. If you are still here, you will spend the night in a cell. If you take the ticket, you can catch the 4 a.m. bus and be in a warm bed by noon. It is your choice." She looked at me, searching for the bluff. She looked for the crack in my armor, the twitch in my eye that would tell her I was joking. She found nothing but a stone wall. She scrambled to pick up the ticket and the voucher from the floor. She shoved them into the bodice of her dress. She stood up, her legs shaking, looking like a broken doll. "I hate you," she hissed. "I will never forgive you for this." I nodded slowly. "I can live with your hatred, Tiffany, but I couldn't live with your incompetence. One day when I am gone, you will need to know how to survive. I would rather you hate me and live than love me and starve when the money runs out." I stepped back and placed my hand on the heavy door. "One last thing," I said. She turned back, her eyes filled with venom. "What you asked when you can come home. You asked when we can be family again." "I don't want to be your family," she spat. "Good," I said. "But if that changes, if you ever decide you want to know your father, not his bank account, here is the condition." I pointed a finger at her. "When you can buy me dinner," I said. "Not with my credit card, not with a loan. When you have a job, and you have saved enough money to invite me to a restaurant, and you can pay the bill with money you earned with your own 2 hands. Then you call me. Then we will talk. Until then, you are on your own." I didn't wait for her response. I didn't want to see her face crumble again. I pulled the door shut. The heavy latch clicked into place with a sound that felt like the closing of a coffin. I locked the deadbolt. I stood in the foyer listening. I heard a scream of frustration from the other side of the door. Then silence. Then the slow, dragging sound of footsteps walking away. I walked to the window and watched through the sheer curtains. I saw her silhouette moving down the driveway, a lonely figure in the darkness, heading toward the main road where the bus station was. She was limping, but she was moving. She was leaving the castle. She was entering the world. I fell back into the chair, my body trembling as the adrenaline left me. I felt sick. I felt like I had just amputated my own limb without anesthesia. But as I watched the taillights of a passing car illuminate her figure, one last time I whispered a prayer. "Run, Tiffany. Run and grow. Hate me if you have to, but grow." I closed my eyes and waited for the dawn. The hardest night of my life was over. Now the long wait would begin. I had planted the seed in the harshest soil imaginable. Now I had to wait and see if anything would bloom, or if I had lost her forever. The seasons changed in Chicago, turning from the gray, wet misery of that awful spring into a humid, heavy summer, and then bleeding into a crisp, golden autumn. 1 full year had passed since the night I locked the doors of my estate against my own daughter. 365 days of silence. 365 days of waking up in a quiet house wondering if I had done the right thing or if I had simply severed the last branch of my family tree out of pride. I had kept my word. I hadn't called her. I hadn't sent checks. I hadn't sent spies, although the urge to ask Mike Vance to drive by her motel was a constant itch in the back of my mind. But I knew that if I hovered, I would intervene, and if I intervened, the lesson would be lost. So I forced myself to sit on my hands and wait. While I waited, the world kept turning. Justice, slow but grinding, finally caught up with Brad Sterling. The file I sent to the district attorney was a roadmap to a conviction. It turned out my daughter wasn't his only victim, just his most recent one. He had defrauded 3 other families, run 2 Ponzi schemes, and owed money to people who solve problems with baseball bats. The court wasn't lenient. He pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have aired his dirty laundry to the world. He is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution in downstate Illinois. I received one letter from him, a frantic scribbled note on prison stationery asking for money for the commissary. I burned it in the fireplace without reading past the first line. He was part of a past I had surgically removed. The house in Lake Forest, the castle that had sparked the war, was gone. Sarah Jenkins handled the sale. It sold for $4.1 million to a young family with 3 children who actually wanted to live there, not flip it for a quick profit. I didn't keep the money. It felt tainted heavy with the memory of the betrayal. Instead, I established the Catherine Caldwell Scholarship Fund. The $4 million now provides full tuition for 50 underprivileged students every year who want to study logistics and engineering. Every time I sign the annual report for the charity, I feel Catherine smiling at me. Her legacy wasn't a house. It was opportunity. It was the future. But even with the charity work, even with the business running smoothly under the new management team, there was a hole in my life. A Tiffany-shaped hole. I missed her. Not the monster she had become in the months leading up to the wedding, but the daughter she used to be. I missed the noise. I missed the potential. I developed a routine to fill the silence. Every Tuesday night, I went to a small classic steakhouse in the Loop called Miller's. It wasn't trendy. It didn't serve foam or deconstructed food. It served meat, potatoes, and strong drinks. It was a place for old men to eat in peace. It was a rainy Tuesday in October when I sat at my usual corner table. I had just ordered a ribeye and a glass of Cabernet. I was reading the Wall Street Journal, trying to ignore the empty chair opposite me. The restaurant was busy, filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware. I didn't hear her approach. I didn't see her until a shadow fell across my newspaper. "Hello, Harrison." The voice was familiar but different. It was lower, steadier. It lacked the shrill edge of entitlement that used to grate on my nerves. I lowered the paper slowly. Tiffany was standing there. She looked different. Shockingly different. The platinum blonde hair extensions were gone, replaced by her natural brunette shade tied back in a practical bun. The heavy contoured makeup was gone, leaving her face fresh and clean. She looked tired. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, and her hands resting on the back of the empty chair were red and chapped. She wasn't wearing Chanel. She wasn't wearing Gucci. She was wearing a simple beige raincoat over a white uniform shirt and black slacks. She looked like a woman who worked for a living. I stared at her, with my heart hammering against my ribs just as hard as it had the night she banged on my door. But this time I didn't feel the urge to lock her out. I felt a desperate hope. "Tiffany," I said, my voice gruff. She didn't sit down. She didn't ask for a hug. She reached into her large, worn tote bag and pulled out a small white cardboard box tied with a string. She placed it gently on the white tablecloth in front of me. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. It was a receipt. She placed it on top of the box. I looked at the receipt. It was from Miller's Steakhouse. It was a receipt for 1 ribeye steak, 1 glass of Cabernet, and a side of spinach. Total $84.50. It was stamped paid in cash. I looked up at her confused. "I paid your bill," she said. "I spoke to the waiter before I came over. Your dinner is on me." I looked at the receipt again. Paid in cash. "Tiffany," I started, but she held up a hand. "It is my money," she said firmly. "I earned it. I am the shift manager at the Daily Crumb Bakery on Wells Street. I work 50 hours a week. I open the store at 4 a.m. I manage the inventory. I handle the staff. I pay my own rent on a studio apartment in Rogers Park. I take the bus to work." She took a breath, her eyes locking with mine. They were clear. They were proud. "I saved for 3 weeks to buy this dinner," she said. "I didn't use a credit card. I didn't borrow it. It is mine." I felt a lump form in my throat the size of a golf ball. I looked at the white box. "And that," I asked, pointing to the box. "That is a lemon tart," she said. "I baked it myself. It is not store-bought. I made the crust. I made the filling. I know it is your favorite." She stood straighter, her shoulders squared. "You told me to call you when I could buy you dinner with money I earned with my own 2 hands," she said. "Well, here I am. I bought you dinner, and I baked you dessert." She paused, her lip trembling slightly, the first crack in her composure. "I don't want anything from you, Dad. I don't want the house. I don't want the credit cards. I don't want the allowance. I wanted you to know that I heard you. I really heard you. And I wanted to know if you would like to share this tart with me." I looked at my daughter. I saw the calluses on her hands. I saw the pride in her posture. I saw the woman I had always hoped she would become, forged in the fire of consequence. She had walked through the desert. She had survived. And she had come back not to take but to give. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was pregnant with possibility. I slowly folded my newspaper and placed it on the empty chair next to me. I looked at the receipt, then at the tart, then at her. My vision blurred with tears I made no effort to hide. I didn't say I forgive you. Forgiveness is a word. This was action. This was redemption. I reached out and pulled out the chair opposite me. "Sit down, Tiffany," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She hesitated as if she couldn't believe the wall had finally come down. "Sit down." I repeated, softer this time. "Please." She sat. She looked small in the big leather chair, but she didn't look weak. She looked substantial. I picked up my fork and the knife. I carefully cut the string on the white box. Inside sat a perfect golden lemon tart. "It looks delicious," I said. "It is," she whispered. "I used Mom's recipe. I found it online." I cut the tart in half. I placed 1/2 on her bread plate and kept the other. Then I looked at her. "Tell me about the bakery," I said. "I want to know everything. I want to know about your inventory. I want to know about your margins. I want to know how you handle the morning rush." Her face lit up. It wasn't the fake socialite smile of the past. It was a genuine spark of passion. "Well," she said, leaning in, "the margins on the sourdough are great, but the cost of butter is killing us on the croissants. I actually developed a new spreadsheet to track waste." I listened. I ate my steak, and I ate the tart, which was tart and sweet, and tasted like victory. I listened to my daughter talk about work, about budgeting, about the bus schedule, about the realities of life. I realized then that I hadn't lost my daughter. I had found her. She had been buried under layers of my own money, suffocated by my own enabling. By stripping it all away, I had given her the room to breathe, to grow, to become a person. The checkbook in my pocket felt light. I wouldn't be opening it tonight. I wouldn't offer to pay her rent. I wouldn't offer to buy her a car. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. She needed to know she could do it. She needed the pride of survival more than she needed my help. But as I looked at her across the table discussing the price of flour with the same intensity I used to discuss shipping logistics, I knew that the connection was back. The respect was back. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was my peer. "This is excellent tart," I said, wiping a crumb from my lip. "Thanks, Dad." She smiled, and this time the word Dad sounded like a title she had earned the right to use, and a title I had earned the right to answer to. We sat there for hours talking until the restaurant closed. It was just a dinner. It was just a tart. But as we walked out into the cool Chicago night, walking side by side toward the bus stop, because I insisted on walking her there, I knew that this was the real wedding. This was the real union. Not between a bride and a groom, but between a father and a daughter who had finally learned how to love each other the right way. With respect, with boundaries, and with the truth. I watched her get on the bus, waving to me from the window as it pulled away. I stood on the corner, an old man in a nice suit, waving back at a shift manager in a raincoat. I had never been prouder in my entire life. I turned and walked toward my car, humming a tune Catherine used to love. The house wouldn't be so quiet tonight. The ghosts were gone, and tomorrow I had a bakery to visit. I heard they had excellent croissants, and I wanted to see the manager. It took me 76 years to learn that true love isn't about shielding our children from every storm, but teaching them how to build their own shelter. For decades, I thought I was protecting Tiffany with my checkbook, but I was actually crippling her spirit. By taking away the safety net, I forced her to find her own strength, and though it broke my heart to watch her fall, seeing her stand up on her own 2 feet was the greatest reward I could have asked for. We often think providing is about money, but sometimes the most valuable provision is the dignity of independence. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. And let me know in the comments. Do you think I was too hard on her, or was it exactly what she needed? I look forward to reading your thoughts.